The sun was a brutal, unrelenting hammer pounding down on the dust-choked city of Ramadi, Iraq. For the men of the sniper section known as Ghost, the oppressive heat was just another enemy they had to endure. They were positioned on the second floor of a dilapidated building, its walls pockmarked by years of small arms fire. Their mission was a simple, maddening sentence on an operations order: observe and engage a known high-value target, HVT, a senior insurgent leader responsible for coordinating deadly ambushes and IED attacks against American convoys. For 3 days, the two young Marines had stared through the milky shimmer of heat waves rising from the street below. They were both excellent marksmen, graduates of the rigorous Scout Sniper School at Camp Pendleton, and their skills honed on ranges where wind and distance were predictable variables. But Ramadi was no range. The city was a living, breathing organism, and their target was a ghost. Intelligence reports placed him in a specific safe house, but the windows remained dark, the battered door remained shut. The only movements were the usual chaos of a city under occupation: civilians scurrying through the streets, the occasional crack of distant small arms fire, and the ever-present threat of a vehicle-borne IED. The younger of the two, a lance corporal from Ohio, wiped the sweat from his brow for the 100th time, leaving a dark smear of dust on his sleeve. He adjusted the focus on his scope, the crosshairs dancing over a second-story window across the street where the HVT was rumored to be staying. "Anything?" his spotter whispered, and his voice a dry croak. "Negative. Curtains haven't moved since yesterday," the lance corporal whispered back, the disappointment thick in his voice. He felt the crushing weight of responsibility. His commanding officers were counting on this kill. Taking out this HVT would disrupt the enemy's command structure, save countless American lives. He replayed his training in his head. Breathing control, trigger squeeze, natural point of aim. But the target never presented himself. Doubt began to creep in. What if he was already gone? What if they were watching the wrong building? What if they were compromised? The tension was a physical presence in the small room, a mixture of boredom and gut-wrenching anxiety. They were the tip of the spear, the silent professionals, but right now they felt anything but professional. Thus, they felt like two kids hiding in a dusty room, waiting for a man who might never come. The responsibility was a burden they felt physically, a knot in their stomachs that no amount of MREs could ease. They knew the stakes. Every hour the HVT remained alive was another hour he could plan and execute an attack on their fellow Marines patrolling the dangerous streets below. On the 4th day, the frustration in the makeshift operations center back at the Forward Operating Base, FOB, was palpable. The battalion commander, a man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much, stared at the map on the wall. The two snipers had done everything by the book, but the book wasn't getting results. They needed a different set of eyes. They needed experience that no textbook could teach. That's when Staff Sergeant Harry Martinez walked in. Martinez was not your average Marine. He was a man who seemed to carry the weight of multiple lifetimes on his broad shoulders. He had started his military journey as a teenager in the New Jersey National Guard, a young man from New Brunswick who wanted to serve his country, but the call of the infantry, the allure of the elite, was too strong. At 22, he had traded the National Guard for the United States Marine Corps, volunteering for the most challenging path and earning his place as a scout sniper. His career had taken him from the bloody, low-intensity conflicts in Central America to the scorching deserts of Kuwait during Operation Desert Storm. After leaving active duty, the pull of service proved too strong, leading him back to the National Guard and eventually to a volunteer deployment to the very heart of the insurgency, Ramadi, in Al-Anbar province. He was older than most of the men in the unit, his hair showing the first hints of gray, his face etched with lines that spoke of harsh sun and harder choices. He didn't brag or boast. He just watched and listened. When he was assigned as the team leader for Ghost, he was given the dossiers of the two young snipers. He saw their qualifications, their perfect scores, their eagerness. He also saw the report from the last 4 days. Nothing. That night, he joined them in the hide site. The two Marines, initially resentful of what they perceived as a babysitter, soon realized they were in the presence of a different kind of predator. Martinez didn't even look through the scope at first. He just sat back from the window in the deep shadows. Man watched the street with his naked eyes. He asked them questions, not about their training, but about the rhythm of the neighborhood. "When does the baker open his shutter?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. The younger Marine blinked. "Sir?" "The bakery on the corner. I saw the sign. When does he open? When does the tea shop across the street get its first customers?" They didn't know. They had been so focused on the target's window, they had missed the story the street was telling. Martinez spent the next 2 days teaching them to see, not just look. He pointed out the subtle shifts in the pattern of life. The kids who played soccer in the dirt lot always appeared at the same time. The old man who sold cigarettes from a cart always took a nap in the shade between 2 and 3 in the afternoon. It was about understanding the environment so completely that you would instantly recognize when something was wrong. "It's not about the shot," Martinez told them, his eyes scanning the street below. "The shot is the easy part. It's the last 2 seconds of a long, hard process. The hard part is being so patient, so much a part of the furniture, that the world forgets you're here. And when the world forgets, it shows you its secrets." He shared stories, not of his own heroics, but of the men he had learned from. He talked about the legends of Vietnam, men like Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock, who the Viet Cong had nicknamed Long Trang, or White Feather, for the feather he wore in his bush hat. He told them how Hathcock had once shot an enemy sniper through his own scope, the bullet following the glint of sunlight to its target. He told them about Chuck Mulhiney, a quiet Oregonian who held the Marine Corps record for kills, but considered it not a competition, but a grim duty to save his fellow Marines, a duty that haunted him decades later when he thought of the ones that got away. He talked about men like Corporal John Roland Burke, who, at Khe Sanh, had given his life in a one-man assault to save his team, earning the Navy Cross. These weren't just stories of killing. They were stories of sacrifice, of an almost supernatural connection to the battlefield, and of the profound, unbreakable bond between the men who shared the shadows. On the 5th day, the pattern broke. Martinez saw it instantly. The tea shop was busier than usual, and the men weren't drinking tea. They were loitering, their eyes constantly flicking up and down the street. Then, the kids' soccer game abruptly ended. The boys ushered inside by a woman who shot a nervous glance down an alley. "He's coming," Martinez said softly, his voice devoid of excitement. It was a simple statement of fact. The street was being sanitized. Lookouts were being posted. The HVT was about to make a move. The two younger Marines scrambled to their scopes, their hearts hammering. Martinez remained calm, watching the flow of human traffic. He wasn't looking for the man himself. He was looking for the hole in the pattern the man would create. A moment later, a hardened-looking man in civilian clothes emerged from a building down the street, flanked by 2 bodyguards. He moved with the arrogance of someone who believed he was untouchable, protected by his network of informants and the chaos of the city. "Your target acquired," the spotter whispered, his voice trembling with adrenaline. The younger sniper had the man in his crosshairs. He tracked him as he walked, his finger resting gently on the trigger. He took a deep breath, let half of it out, and began the final trigger squeeze. But the man was moving fast, weaving between civilians. The sniper's crosshairs danced, never settling on a clean shot on the man's chest. He could see the bodyguards, their eyes sweeping the rooftops. The shot was too risky. He could miss. He could wound a civilian. He eased the pressure on the trigger, his heart sinking. "No shot," he muttered, the words tasting like ash. The HVT was heading for a vehicle. In 30 seconds, he would be gone, and the opportunity would be lost for another week, another month, or forever. The young Marine felt a wave of nausea. He had failed. Again. But Martinez was already moving. He had slid into the sniper's position with an eerie silence, his movements fluid and practiced. He didn't even seem to be looking through the scope in the traditional sense. He was watching the man's gait, his posture, the way his head moved. He wasn't just seeing a target. He was reading him. He saw the HVT glance at his watch, a brief, predictable moment where his head tilted down and his forward momentum slowed by a fraction of a second. He saw the path the man would take to the car door. Bodyguards are a pattern, just like the baker, Martinez murmured, more to himself than to the others. They have a job. Their job is to look for threats, and when they do their job, they create a hole. The HVT reached the car. The bodyguards did exactly what they were trained to do, so one opened the rear door, while the other scanned the rooftops and the street. For a split second, both bodyguards' eyes were averted. The HVT, confident he was safe, bent his knees slightly, his head dipping as he prepared to lower himself into the back seat. He was no longer a moving target. He was a static one for less than a second. In that fragment of time, Martinez's world narrowed to a single point. The cacophony of the city faded, the heat disappeared. There was no past, no future, only the present, pure and crystalline. His breathing stopped. His heart seemed to pause between beats. The crosshairs of his rifle, an extension of his own will, settled not on the man's center mass, but on a point in space where he knew the man's head would be in the next heartbeat. He had calculated the lead, the wind, the drop, an incredibly loud in the small room. A sound that was incredibly loud in the small room. A sound of pure, focused violence. Down on the street, the effect was instantaneous. The HVT crumpled, not falling backward, but collapsing vertically, his body folding into the space he had just been trying to occupy. He was dead before he hit the ground. The bodyguards, stunned for a critical second, scrambled for cover, spraying automatic fire at random buildings. In the hide site, the silence was heavier than the gunfire. The two young Marines stared, their mouths open. They hadn't even seen Martinez aim. They had seen him settle behind the rifle, and then the world had ended for one man on the street below. Now Martinez smoothly unfolded himself from the weapon, his face an unreadable mask. "Good shooting," the spotter stammered, a stupid thing to say, and he knew it. Martinez shook his head slightly, his eyes still on the chaos unfolding in the street. "It wasn't shooting. It was reading. You saw a target. I saw a moment." The extraction team would be there in minutes. As they packed up their gear, Martinez looked at the two young men. They were no longer just trained killers. They had just witnessed the difference between training and wisdom, between skill and art. They had learned that patience wasn't just waiting, it was a form of aggressive observation. They had learned that the environment was not just a backdrop, but a source of intelligence. And they had learned that the true value of a veteran wasn't in the stories he could tell, but in the quiet, deadly certainty he brought to the most critical moment. Back at the FOB, the atmosphere was electric. The battalion commander personally came to the sniper section's quarters. He shook Martinez's hand, a rare gesture of respect from a senior officer to a staff non-commissioned officer. The two younger snipers stood a little taller, proud to have been part of the mission, even as observers. They knew they had been given a master class not just in sniping, but in what it truly meant to be a Marine Scout sniper. They had learned that the rifle was just a tool. The real weapon was the mind of the man behind it, a mind forged in the fires of experience, patience, and an unshakable commitment to the men he was sworn to protect. Martinez had stepped in, and in a single, perfect moment, and he had shown them that the legacy of the Hathcocks and the Mawhinnies was not just a relic of past wars, but a living, breathing